The film kicks off by showcasing our lead character, Robert McCall. Robert is a remarkably organized individual who meticulously times every action with a stopwatch, focusing on precision and efficiency. Currently, he's enjoying a quiet life, having retired from his intense careers with the Marines and the CIA. Robert instead works his part-time job at Home Art,
like firemen.
Yo, Pop, bet you didn't have to push no dollies at your old job.
a place where he's well regarded by his colleagues who are unaware of his past. At lunch break, Robert sits with Ralphie. Ralphie, who's trying to become a security guard, receives help from Mr. McCall to manage his nutrition and physical exercise to achieve the necessary weight. Robert then hears a crunch, and his supposed tuna sandwich has hidden potato chips inside. Mr. McCall advises him to focus on gradual progress rather than immediate perfection. Robert is troubled by insomnia and spends many nights at a local diner. There, he sips tea and engrosses himself in books. He set himself the challenge of reading 100 books and is presently enjoying The Old Man in the Sea. Every night, he encounters a young girl who also frequents the diner.
Oh no.
Truth in now, right now.
Their exchanges might be brief, but over time, they are gradually getting to know one another. Fast forward to the next day, and we find Mr. McCall going about his usual routine at work. A bunch of his colleagues swing by, admitting they've been making bets about his previous profession. Robert, with a twinkle in his eye, claims he was a pip, likening himself to the backup singers for Gladys Knight, and even busts a move to prove it. His workmates don't buy it, expecting something quite different. Nightfall brings Mr. McCall back to the diner, where the same girl joins him shortly after. She spots him with a fresh book and inquires about the finale of the previous one.
Ate the whole fish until there was nothing left.
Robert speaks about the book when their conversation is cut short by the arrival of a limo across the street from the diner. The girl receives a call from Slavi. Despite her reluctance, she heads outside to jump into a limo. The following evening, Robert again spots the girl at the diner. She joins him at his table, introducing herself as Alina.
Good.
When Robert asks about the bruise on her face, she shrugs it off, claiming it was just a result of some silly mishap. She has dreams of becoming a singer and gives Mr. McCall a CD with some of her music.
Look, it's not professional.
Robert tells her she can become anything she wants. Alina notices a wedding ring on Robert's finger, but instead learns about his late wife. Later, when Robert walks her home, they are stopped by Slavi.
Slavi, у меня ударил, all right?
Slavi strikes Alina for reportedly disrespecting a client. Robert doesn't move, and Slavi, who dismisses Alina as worthless, hands Robert a business card. Time ticks by, and Alina is noticeably absent from the diner. Eventually, the diner's manager spills the beans. Alina's in the ICU, severely beaten.
She's at the ICU at Sharmat.
Deeply concerned, Mr. McCall heads to the hospital, where he spots Mandy, a friend of Alina's. When Mr. McCall finally approaches, Mandy recoils in fear, questioning his identity. After establishing that he's simply a friend, Mandy reveals her entrapment in the same grim line of work as Alina.
She thought her life could be hers one day.
She confides that Alina was beaten by Slavi after she retaliated against one of his hits, and so she was made an example. Later that night, Mr. McCall studies the business card given by Slavi and the CD gifted by Alina. He reckons that if he doesn't step in, Alina's life could be snuffed out. But there's a promise he made to his late wife, to never revert to his violent past. This choice gnaws at him, tearing him apart inside, but in the end, he resolves that action is necessary. As the night deepens, Robert tails Slavi to an apartment above a restaurant, the chosen meeting spot for Slavi and his cronies. Robert waltzes in, playing the cordial guest, and presents an envelope stuffed with $9,800.
I can give you $9,800.
At first, they scoff at Robert, but Slavi eventually warms up to the offer. Nearly 10 grand for Alina's freedom. Just as they shake on it, Slavi throws a curveball.
Take your fucking money.
The cash would only buy Alina a month's worth of freedom. Enraged, he rejects the deal and orders Robert to get lost. Robert then begins aligning the glass skulls on the desk, pointing them toward each man in the room. He strides to the door, but instead of exiting, he locks it and swings around. After scrutinizing each man, he starts the timer on his watch and heads for Slavi. The henchman nearest to the door pulls a gun, but Robert disarms him, breaking his arm and firing a shot into Slavy. He proceeds to wipe out the other 3 men, brutally wounding them multiple times and removing them from existence. Robert then stops his watch timer, pleased with his efficient work. He saunters over to Slavy, settling down next to him as life slowly fades away. Robert chillingly predicts Slavy's imminent end. Contrasting it with Alina's continued existence, after the violent showdown, Robert heads home to freshen up, apologizing to his departed wife as he slips his wedding ring back on. In the aftermath of the murders, a Russian mobster named Tevi descends upon Boston, tasked with uncovering the killer.
Money that comes with conditions non-negotiable.
He joins forces with a cluster of corrupt cops to gather leads. He directs them to grab surveillance footage from all cameras within a 6-block radius and instructs them to take him to his lodgings. The next morning, one of the crooked cops, Frank Masters, escorts Tevi to the office of John Looney, a local Irish mobster, continuing his investigation. John pleads ignorance about the murders, expressing his hatred for Russians, dubbing them insane and presumptuous. In response, Tevi dismisses John, claiming he lacks the intelligence to orchestrate such killings. He unveils his real motive for the visit, denouncing the Irish for pilfering from the Russians.
See, I hate you fucking Russians. You're all crazy.
And warning that such behavior will no longer be tolerated.
I'm here.
As the hostility escalates, Frank discreetly readies himself for a potential showdown. John, fuming at Tevi's threats, is met with a sudden barrage from Tevi. Frank shoots the 2 other men in the room.
Roll this mother...
And Tevi doesn't let up, pummeling John over and over until he's lifeless. With the room now quiet, Tevi turns to Frank, declaring his arrival with this brutal message. Tevi receives a call from the top dog Pushkin. Tevi suggests that an outsider, not one of their usual rivals, committed the murders, commending the skill it would have required. Pushkin dismisses his speculations, demanding that Tevi resolve the situation publicly to deter further incidents. Scanning still shots from security cameras, Tevi spots Robert entering the building. Meanwhile, Robert realizes Ralphie hasn't clocked in for his regular shift at work. When he queries the schedule manager, he learns Ralphie quit without a hint of a reason. Later, Robert visits a restaurant Ralphie's mother owns. Ralphie reveals he's taking a hiatus to help his mom spruce up the building. When night falls, 2 crooked cops, Ramar and Peterson, are spotted dining at Ralphie's mom's restaurant. They pressure her to wrap up business early and start squeezing her for protection money. They threaten another accident if she doesn't keep up with payments. Robert encounters them outside the restaurant and tells them he wants to report a crime. The officers dismiss him, beginning to drive off until one receives a personal call from Robert.
Why wait city services when I got 2 corrupt cops right in front of me?
He shows them a video he captured of their shakedown of a convenience store clerk, including their confession to sparking the restaurant fire.
Ask the lady down the street. When it had the fire?
Robert can't help but laugh as he reveals that the recording is the only one he has. The officers threaten him, but Robert quickly disarms the pair and gives them a beating. He instructs them to return the extorted money or they'll be on headline news. Cornard, the corrupt cops have no option but to comply and later reimburse Ralphie's mother. In a different part of the city, Teddy pays a visit to Mandy, confronting her about the untruths she spouted during their earlier conversation. On his arrival in Boston, Teddy had inquired if Mandy knew anything about Alina,
Strange about Slavy before he was murdered.
to which she claimed they weren't close, but he's recently uncovered that they are indeed good friends and demands to know when Mandy last spoke to Alina. Mandy admits that she visited Alina in the hospital a week ago and mentions the presence of a black man who seemed concerned about Alina. Satisfied with her honesty, Teddy thanks her, then abruptly puts her in a chokehold and squeezes until there's no movement. That same afternoon, Robert is spotted playing baseball with his co-workers. Ralphie appears proudly sporting his new security guard uniform, having passed the requisite test. His peers are proud, and he tips his hat to Robert in acknowledgement. The next day at work, a criminal invades the Home Mart store, brandishing a gun at the cashier, Jenny, and demanding the money from the register. Robert approaches, unperturbed, and starts emptying the till, willing to let the event slide. However, when the robber demands Jenny's ring,
It was my mother's.
Fuck your mother. Give me that ring.
A keepsake from her mother, she refuses to part with it. Robert takes in various details about the man, such as his tattoos and baseball cap. But when a family with children walks into the store, Robert chooses not to intervene, instead handing over the ring and tracking the man to his car to note his license plate number. The police inform them of a recent string of robberies connected to the same man. Robert reassures Ralphie, asserting that no amount of money is worth a life. A moment later, Robert retrieves a sledgehammer from the utility tools section. The following day, Jenny finds her ring back in the register, while Robert returns the wiped clean hammer to its place on the rack. As night approaches, Teddy visits McCall's home under the guise of a detective probing into the deaths of 5 Russians.
2 weeks ago, 5 dead. Russian restaurant.
He shows Robert a picture of Mandy's deceased body, passing off her death as an unfortunate accident. For the remainder of the day, Robert purchases various items for travel and fabricates a false prescription for mechalazine, a medication commonly used to alleviate motion sickness during flights. Later, Teddy gets his crew to trail Robert to the diner with the intention of capturing and killing him. However, Robert is aware of their presence and singles out the line worker who enters the diner as an undercover henchman for Teddy.
He varies these instructions and I'm gonna kill you, understand?
He points out the man's unusually soft hands for someone supposedly working on power lines. Simultaneously, a truck pulls up in front of the diner, obscuring Teddy and Frank's view. The undercover man brandishes an Uzi and instructs Robert to head out to the car. Unflustered, Robert activates his stopwatch
We'll walk across the street, me and you. Black Denali.
and studies the man, swiftly using his book to disarm the thug and kill him on the table. He then plunges the diner into darkness and walks out, covertly snapping photos of Teddy and his men in their car. Teddy orders his men to bring Robert in alive, and they begin pursuit. Robert deliberately leaves a trail of bloody handprints on a wall to mislead Teddy, and manages to isolate one of the corrupt cops. After incapacitating the officer, Robert escapes with his phone. At home, Robert attends to a gunshot wound by boiling honey and applying it to the injury. Anticipating Teddy and his men, he manages to leave his apartment unnoticed, deliberately leaving the bathroom sink running. From the vantage point of another building, Robert observes Teddy's crew via hidden cameras planted in his apartment. Upon entering Robert's apartment, Teddy's men discover receipts for a flight to Mexico in an empty prescription bottle, suggesting Robert's intended escape. However, Teddy dismisses this evidence as a deliberate misdirection, asserting that Robert is watching them even at that moment. Meanwhile, Robert pays a visit to his old friends, Brian and Susan Plummer, both of whom were former colleagues at the agency he used to work for. He approaches Susan,
Susan, I just need to know who this man is.
confident in her ability to gather essential information about Teddy and his employers. While Susan ventures off to the agency to identify Teddy, Brian expresses his relief at seeing Robert alive. It is disclosed that Robert had faked his death years prior, a truth Susan had always suspected, deeming Robert too smart to fall victim to a simple car bombing. Returning home via helicopter, Susan imparts her findings to Robert. The men Robert eliminated were part of the Russian Mafia, led by Vladimir Pushkin. Teddy, whose real name is revealed to be Nikolai, is a fixer who is called upon whenever Pushkin needs a problem resolved.
Is who Pushkin sends when he's got a problem.
It also emerges that the corrupt cops, Ramar and Peterson, were on Pushkin's payroll, but they were recently found dead. Susan concludes her report by issuing a warning to Robert. These men will stop at nothing until they and everyone he cares about are dead. Returning to the city the next day, Robert tracks down Frank and cunningly lures him outside by setting off his car alarm. Frank, paranoid yet determined to shut off the alarm, proceeds to his garage, unaware that Robert is lying in wait for him. He traps him in his car, which is rigged with a hose to funnel carbon monoxide inside, effectively creating a makeshift gas chamber. Desperate for information on Pushkin, Robert pressures Frank, who, after enduring the toxic environment for a while, agrees to cooperate. Guided by Frank, Robert is led to a warehouse where the Russians store their stash. There, he confronts the man in charge, coercing him to make his men surrender. He then proceeds to lock everyone in the warehouse's meat freezer, effectively securing the man and the money within. Next, Robert forces Frank into alerting the police, who upon arrival, apprehend Frank and discover the frozen mobsters and money.
I was a fucking good cop.
Robert then makes his way to Frank's safety deposit box, which includes a USB stick containing information about Pushkin's operations. In another part of the city, Teddy is holding a meeting with a Russian mercenary to discuss the assassination of Robert. When the man at the table leaves to use the bathroom, McCall walks in moments later carrying the man's bloody broken sunglasses. He confronts Teddy, presenting him with an ultimatum. Call Pushkin and instruct him to close his operations or continue the pursuit and die. Teddy instead refers to Robert as a piece of lint, a mere nuisance to be cast away. Undeterred, Robert begins to recount a tale about a 12-year-old Russian orphan neglected throughout his life. In the story, the child is adopted by a caring man who gives him a home and family to call his own.
I'm giving you the opportunity to make yours.
However, a week later, the parents are found murdered in their bed. Drawing his story to a close, McCall implies that Teddy was the boy, suggesting that he killed his foster parents out of fear of being abandoned once again. Laughing off McCall's theory, Teddy claims he's not sentimental, arguing that such traits are weaknesses. McCall leaves a note with his phone number for Teddy, advising him to call once he's decided on the offer. As the night rolls on, Mr. McCall puts Frank's USB to use, transferring millions of dollars from Pushkin's operations to the FBI. He discovers a list of Pushkin's oil tankers on the drive and plants bombs inside the ship's dock at the pier, effectively destroying them. In his growing desperation, Teddy opts for a different approach to draw out McCall. Along with a team of mercenaries, he descends on Home Mart, taking McCall's co-workers hostage. He sets an ultimatum. McCall has 30 minutes to show himself or his friends will be killed. Teddy attempts to track Robert's cell phone, only to realize that he had left it on a bus, using it as a distraction to infiltrate the store. Ralphie is singled out by the mercenaries to lead them to the security room, but they walk right into a trap set by Robert, who takes them out stealthily. Is instructed by Robert to guide everyone to safety while he deals with the intruders. With Teddy's men now inside the building, the lights suddenly go out and the doors slam shut, trapping them all inside. Robert starts improvising, turning items around the store into traps. He uses barbed wire and a heavy bag of gravel to create makeshift gallows. A second mercenary finds his comrade hanging from it, but before he can react, McCall strikes, using a gardening tool to finish him off. In a moment of confrontation, Teddy manages to shoot Robert in the shoulder. However, he makes a quick escape using a torch and doorknob to cauterize his wound. Two more of Teddy's henchmen stumble upon the scene. They notice a torch placed on top of a puddle of gasoline with a wire attached. Suspecting a trap, they decide to ignore it and proceed. Robert then takes out the first man only to patiently wait for the second to approach. He then takes him out as well. Ralphie comes to aid Mr. McCall but is shot in the leg for his efforts. In a quick assessment of the situation, Robert instructs Ralphie to rush to the breaker box and turn the power back on in precisely 40 seconds. As Ralphie dashes off to fulfill his mission, Robert lures another henchman into a lounge room. He leaves a trail of blood leading into the room. As Ralphie switches the power back on, the henchman finds himself in a room with multiple cans of compressed oxygen inside a microwave. The sudden power surge causes the microwave to turn on, leading to a massive explosion that eliminates the assailant. Racing against time, Teddy makes his way to Ralphie with murderous intent, but Robert interjects, brandishing a nail gun. He unloads nails into Teddy's pressure points, immobilizing him completely. Overwhelmed and desperate, Teddy questions Robert's identity, but Robert just looks at him, and Teddy is met with a final shot to end him. 3 days later, Robert travels to Moscow, Russia, to find Pushkin. He catches the mob boss off guard during a shower. Flickering the bathroom lights on and off, Robert confronts Pushkin, saying he's here for the head of the snake. Pushkin tries to bribe his way out, but Robert is already gone from the room. As Pushkin reaches for his weapon beside the overflowing sink, he steps onto cut and exposed wires left behind by Robert. His final screams echo throughout the mansion as he is electrocuted and dies. Leaving Pushkin's state, Robert passes the lifeless bodies of the guards and heads home. Upon his return, he is met by Alina, who is on her road to recovery. She informs him that she has found a proper job and has taken up reading. She also mentions an envelope containing $9,800 that she found among her items at the hospital. She thanks Robert for the changes in her life, implying she knows he's the one who set her free. Months later, Robert places an online ad, branding himself as the Equalizer. He offers his assistance to those in need who could use his unique skill set. He receives a coded email asking for help, to which he simply replies with a yes. And here, the movie ends. If you enjoy the video, please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments section the next movie I will recap for you.